You probably have heard that a lot of people were complaining this year about what happened at Woolen Folk, and there were a lot of negative remarks on social media saying, "Well, people are just too spoiled, and they should have prepared better for the weather," and everybody likes to complain. So I wanted to invite a few of the vendors, and I just placed an open call on Instagram and said, anybody who wants to talk to me, please reach out. So they're not any particular friends of mine. Three of those vendors are new to me, but I wanted to hear what they had to say and share their experience of what really happened at Woolen Folk. So here are their stories. Hi, so my guests today are Kat and Penny from Cesium Yarn. Welcome.
Thank you.
How long have you two been dyers?
I have been dyeing since 2020, and Penny takes care of literally all of the logistics from our business, other than the active application of the dye to the yarn.
And you both are scientists?
Yeah, I'm a chemist.
And I have a degree in biology.
Does that help you in your business?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah. I think that really drives how I chose to dye yarn and the methods I used. I feel like it makes me the dyer that I am to have my chemistry training.
There is a surprising amount of overlap between the kinds of things that you practice when you're doing science training. So making sure that things are replicable, you can do them over and over again, making sure that you document everything that you do, lots of things that are very useful for dyeing as well as in science.
So what's your approach to yarn dyeing? Like what's important to you? What gives you inspiration?
We talk a lot about following our joy, and no matter what the joy is. So we have the core cesium collection that we did initially that was inspired by cesium, the element, and the science behind it. And then we moved into the nostalgia of, we have lots of different things, but Mr. Rogers was one of our recent ones because he is just somebody we enjoy, and being able to tell his story through that. And we've had vintage Pyrex because we both love baking. And
We try to make it personal because I think that is how we come up with colors that we end up loving, is going through stuff that we already have a connection to.
we have ones inspired by our dog. We did our Halloween box inspired by Clue the movie.
Which is a movie that we both love. And I am obsessed with the game Clue to the point where Kat plays it with me several times a year, but only on holidays.
Yeah.
So it's like a birthday, Christmas, New Year's thing because I love it too much.
Yes.
Well, what part do shows play in your business?
They are a really great way of getting our yarn into the hands of people we haven't had the chance to meet before. And even as a yarn consumer, I personally like being able to touch people's stuff. And we do our best to get all of our colors photo accurate online, but there is the skewing from screens and all that stuff, that being able to put the yarn in somebody's hand and for them to touch and see the colors against their own skin tone and whatever is really, really helpful in driving sales and making connections in the future. Because once you've touched the yarn, you know who you can trust to do certain things well.
Right.
Shows are also a time when we get to meet people that we've only talked to virtually, which is super, super special. I feel like I'm a very tactile person. I'm a huge hugger, and it is so exciting to be able to meet people in the flesh and blood that I've only talked to online. It's a completely different experience for me.
We kept saying to each other after shows, like, our internet friends are real people. Like, they're real friends. They're not just people who live in our phone. And, fundamentally you understand that, but then you're like, wow, you're 6 inches taller than me. And
I didn't imagine that.
I just imagined, but it's really fun.
Right. So you do multiple shows per year.
Yes.
Yeah. We have this year, we've had several in October. We had a few in September. We have a few more in November.
I think we average about one a month, except for in the fall, which is our busy season. And then it's probably 2 or 3 a month.
Is woolen folk something bigger than you usually deal with, more complicated than you usually deal with?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
we chose to vend there because we thought it'd be a great place to get exposure and meet a group of knitters that we hadn't gotten to meet in some of our more local shows. We have done most of our shows in the southern part of the United States and haven't gone north yet. So it is a different group of people we hadn't gotten to meet.
And it is a place where lots of people come in from various areas because there are so many events and because the events are so like already so highly attended. So it meant that we could see a lot of people that weren't even local to New York, but were coming to New York for the festival. So we got to meet more people than even if we'd done a local event in a different place.
When did you start preparing for woolen folk?
We applied early in the year. We got our acceptance in April, and we did been doing logistics for a few months after that, and then a solid 3 months of preparing yarn and choosing colors and the physical labor of getting everything prepared.
This is by far the most yarn we've ever brought. It was a completely different level of yarn preparation.
And with one person carrying, like doing all of the yarn dyeing, that is hours and hours and hours of physical labor each day to get the yarn ready and prepared and washed and dyed and skeined up and looking nice and presentable for everyone who's going to be seeing it for the first time or the 100th time. But the impression of seeing the yarn in person does make a difference.
When you're preparing for the show, do you think about how you're gonna display this yarn in your booth? Like, is there some sort of like logistical preparation going into like, this is what we're gonna bring, this is how we're gonna display it?
Yes. In some venues, we know that we are going to be, that our customers are probably going to be shawl knitters or sock knitters or sweater knitters. And so we have to make the choice about who we're preparing for. Preparing for sweater knitters is different than preparing for a shawl knitter. And we make an effort to be as size inclusive as possible in our dyeing practices. So when we made the decision to do sweater quantities for this show, we wanted to make sure there were at least 20 plus skeins of a color so anybody could walk in and knit a sweater with what they found.
And from a logistical perspective, you have a 10 by 10 space. There are only so many ways that you can arrange things in that physical space. So we pretty much after every show that we've done for the past year, we have talked about, okay, here's where we put the tables this time. This is what I want to switch next time to see if we can make it easier for people to get into the booth, easier for people to find the yarn that they want, easier for them to check out.
We like our booth spaces to be organized by yarn weight, and then within that to be organized by color and have samples adjacent to those yarns. So like the shirt I'm wearing has fingering weight yarn in a tan color. So we put this sample near the fingering weight yarn that's tan. So you have an idea of what it would look like knit up. But another thing we consider is, could somebody in a wheelchair get into our space and look at the booth, or would somebody have to walk in and hold up yarn for them to see from a distance, which is not including them in the shopping experience. And it's important to us that you personally, as an individual, get to access our yarn.
Because we really try to curate the best possible experience for someone to make it as enjoyable as possible, because people buy yarn for fun. It's supposed to be an uplifting, happy thing, and we want to make sure that we are making it as easy as possible for someone to engage with the yarn and find exactly the thing that they're looking for. A lot of that comes down to, can they see all of the yarn? Can they reach the yarn that they're interested in? And how easy it is to get into the booth in the first place to look.
Right. Well, you guys coming from south to the northern show, And I've seen some very negative comments on Instagram talking about, it's vendors' responsibility to be prepared for anything weather throws your way. Do you feel like if it was a nice sunny day, it would be a completely different experience for you, and the only thing that made it negative for you was the weather?
No.
We are seasoned at vending in the outdoors.
Yes.
We have all the stuff we need. We have all the tarps and the lighting. We were told as of Wednesday that we would be inside. So when we left for our 8-hour drive to the show, we made the decision that since we were told we would be inside, there was not a reason to pack the tarps and the lighting and the extra waterproofing and all that stuff, since we were under the impression and that we would be inside.
Yeah. We basically have 2 setups that we do, and one is for indoor shows where we don't have to worry about wind, we don't have to worry if yarn falls on the ground, we don't have to worry about rain blowing in, and then we have one for outdoor shows where we take that kind of stuff into consideration. So we make sure that our tent has sidewalls so that if there's wind, it gets caught. If there's rain, hopefully it doesn't rain too much on the yarn.
We have tent weights, so we're not concerned about the stability. We have tarps, so if we're doing a multi-day show, we can tarp up all of our yarn so it doesn't get wet when we're not directly there to be like, oh, the rain and wind shifted, let's move things.
Mm-hmm.
And we have lots and lots of bags and drying protocols for getting our yarn dried when we get home. And
and all of this is stuff that we have learned through experience in the past several years of working at shows and realizing, okay, we need to add this kind of tarp or what have you.
And in no other vending experience have I ever, yes, the rain can be frustrating. Yes, the wind can be frustrating. You almost got carried off in our tent in a previous show trying to hold it down before we got it fully staked down. But we walked away from that event happy that we had been there, respected, and felt like we got the experience we were promised, because nobody does control the weather. And when we showed up, we knew we were going to be outside. So we knew how to be ready for that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's talk about Woolen Fox. So what was the communication that you had with the organizers prior to the event?
Primarily, we were sent recordings of Zoom calls that we would then have to watch the 2-hour meeting and gather any information we needed.
There were several emails that went out on the same day, a few days before the event. And that was when the majority of the housekeeping stuff that we expect to happen was done.
And that's for the most part in other shows, information we get immediately upon signing a contract to vend at an event.
We also, as Kat had mentioned, we checked to make sure that we would have basically a structure behind our booth that we can hang a sign from. Mm-hmm. Because we had talked to the organizers and somebody had requested that because it does make it a lot easier to find vendors. So I had emailed and asked if we would have basically piping that we could attach to. And in that email on the Wednesday beforehand, they still said, yes, you can have, there will be piping. You can't bring your own tent to be inside. You're not allowed to set up a tent inside, which is totally standard and totally normal.
And that's
But it meant that we didn't bring any of our tent supplies because we knew we couldn't use a tent.
Right. So you drove for 8 hours. You arrived on Thursday. Tell me about your experience arriving to Woolen Folk.
It was a little bit intimidating from the moment we got there.
There are a lot of times we'll show up at an event and pull up and there is a table labeled information where the organizer is standing with a few volunteers or not volunteers, paid people who you'll sign in, you walk up to the organizer, they'll be like, great, you're so-and-so, we'll have this person take you to your booth and show you where you're going to set up.
So we pulled up and got ourselves parked. And happily, we found a parking spot, which I know was not the case for a lot of vendors. But I usually do the logistics stuff, so I got out and there was no clear direction on where I should go. So I walked up to some other vendor who was there and said, "Hey, do you know where the check-in is?" And that vendor said, "No, I have no idea. I'm sorry." And I just kept repeating that as I walked along. And every time people said, "I don't know." So eventually I went and tracked down an organizer. Um, and we had been instructed to bring all of the supplies that we were donating to the like goodie bags and the so like we had two sets of items, one for the swag bags for the first dinner and then one for door prizes for people coming on the Friday event. So I had all of those in my hands and I was ready. And I found the organizer and basically was told there's a spot you can set up there. I don't know what to do with these goodie bags. I'll come back later. So we get ourselves set up in this spot, which was outside, which was a surprise, and basically blocking another person's booth, um, because we had two booths sort of set into an alley. So the booth behind us was going to probably not have a very easy time of people walking into their booth. So we were a little bit nervous about that, but I asked the organizer, like, is this going to be another booth or should we try and fill it so it doesn't look empty? And she said, no, there's another person coming to set up eventually. So we just kind of decided to wait it out and see what happened. But at that point, we were having a pretty atypical experience already. Um,
Most events will have a map before we even show up with what building we're in, where we are in the building. And when we show up, they just walk us to that building and to the space that we already know the building name and the space number and how to find it.
and then we know who we're expected to be next to. And a lot of the time, we can arrange with the other vendors to make sure that we're all using the space as effectively as possible.
Like there's usually a set number of outlets. So it'll be like, okay, so who needs an outlet? Who's got an extension cord? What's the best way to use these resources to be respectful of each other and the space to not put anybody at risk? And it's always been a very highly collaborative effort from vendors and organizers to make it as effective and safe as possible for everyone.
Which is
But
part of the reason that we love doing shows because we get to experience the community and the unity between people who spend a lot of their time in the yarn world.
well,
And
what
that
was so different about this experience for you?
I don't think there's nothing negative I can say about my interactions with other vendors in the event.
no,
All of the other vendors were lovely. All of the customers were incredibly kind and compassionate towards us while we were struggling to do what we had promised we would do. And I think what fell short is that we shared what we were told to expect: live music, good access, ADA compliance. We were like, this is why you should come see us at this event, because this is set out to be something incredible for all of us. And to feel like we misled our customers is heartbreaking. Like I don't want to be in a place ever where I'm misleading somebody. And based on the information I was given by organizers, I really thought I was telling my customers the truth. And that's not what happened.
and we had, 2 or 3 hours to pivot once we learned about the situation that we were going to be in. And we did not receive any support in making those changes that we needed to make. Never was there a, hey, do you need anything? Or are you doing okay?
We had other vendors coming through and being like, do you need lighting? Do you need food? Do you need a break to go to the bathroom? Or we're going to Walmart. Do you need tarps? Like every other vendor came through and said, I'm about to go do so and so. Can I pick you up anything on the way out?
We weren't even provided with the Wi-Fi information until Friday. We used our own hotspots because we didn't have access to the Wi-Fi.
Right.
And when you say that it's going to be a credit card event, we have to be able to run our point of sale system in order to take those payments.
Were things different on Friday?
Things were much more crowded on Friday. That was when it started to get scary from a safety perspective. We had known that there were going to be accessibility issues the minute we walked onto the site because there just wasn't enough space for people to move around. And then we did not really realize how little space there was for the number of people that were going to be attending until it started to fill up with 3,000 people.
It would have been crowded beyond comfort levels at a quarter of the number of people who were there.
It felt fairly crowded on Thursday evening when there were 200 people there.
Right.
And then things just kept getting more and more intense.
Was there any communication between the organizers and you, like on Friday?
I saw her walk. I saw them, any of them walk by sometimes.
Yeah, we talked a lot with the staff at the venue who were trying to do things like make sure that we weren't being dripped on by the tents and, you know, make sure that we had safe access to electricity. Somebody came around and just, you know, made sure that we didn't need tables taken out or chairs taken out because not everybody needed all of the tables. So they were trying to make it less cluttered than it was, but we never received any kind of email communication or in-person communication from the Wool and Folk staff.
So when you're going for a show like this and you drive for 8 hours, there is a certain amount of expectation of how successful you hope this show is going to be for you financially. Did it meet your expectations?
It definitely didn't. And one of the really disappointing things is that I think we are the lucky ones. We almost broke even, which is very different from our expectations of the event, but we're not financially disastrous. This was not a disaster for us financially.
We're able to move forward. There are not going to be lasting consequences on our business financially because of this.
And luckily, we have a pretty robust schedule of events. So we have more events coming later, and we're coming off of several events.
It's just the amount of product that we took home. I was expecting to spend the time between Wool and Folk and our next show trying to make as much product as possible. I got home and I was like, I don't need anything else. We
didn't dye any yarn because we just had enough already.
It's just at this point, I might as well emotionally recover from the weekend.
Right. Have you ever had another show that was financially as dissatisfying?
I've had trunk shows. So trunk shows are when we do pop-ups in a yarn show, yarn shop. And I've had some of those where we don't sell as much as I think we are going to. But there is not as much of an upfront cost for doing a trunk show. In a trunk show, you'll do a split with the owner while you're there most of the time. So we still walk away with more money than we spent on gas and housing.
Yeah. I don't think we have ever had an event where we were even within spitting distance of losing money. And in this case, we did lose money because of how much of an investment attending a show that far away was, how much more expensive the vendor fees were,
and
just how much we had invested.
And we were so lucky to be in an Airbnb with a group of friends. So had we paid for housing as just the two of us as a business instead of being in a house with 10 other people, we would have lost so much more money.
And a probably fairly disastrous amount of money at that point.
There were other comments that I saw on Instagram saying, well, it's part of business, right? It's an expensive event. It's an expensive place. You're in upstate New York. Hotels are expensive. It's all part of the thing. You're getting exposure from it. Like, what's your reply to that kind of comment?
So my take on that is, had we been at any other event and been cared for by organizers and our contract's been honored and we lost money, I would not be touting how terrible of an experience it was and how unfair it is that we lost money. Had expectations been met that we were promised when we invested this money, it wouldn't be a concern to me. The concern comes after the fact, when we weren't given what we paid for. So it's the same thing as, okay, you order something from me online and you order 9 skeins and I ship you 1. It doesn't matter how beautiful that 1 skein is, you paid for 9 skeins of yarn.
Right.
You should get what you paid for.
I also think that it's a question of how the expectations and the costs line up. So basically, at an event where we pay a quarter, we maybe have lower expectations for what we can expect from the organizers because they're we're compensating them for a certain amount of their time and energy. And at a much higher price point, I expect to at least have,
At the bare minimum, the same experience we would have paying less for an experience.
yes, I expect a level of organization that allows us the chance to be successful because it is a partnership and we trust the organizers with a lot of the details that we, 5 states away as 2 people, just cannot control.
Right.
So that's where the organizer and vendor partnership can be so strong and also where it broke down.
And I think part of it comes down to the fact that a lot of times, had we come out in the negative from any other vending event, we would be like, okay, this is not one we're going to apply for next year. Like, okay, this wasn't a good fit for our personal brand. That doesn't make the event a failure. And sometimes it comes down to people only want farm yarn and we don't sell farm yarn, or people only want notions and we don't sell notions, or people only want bags and we don't sell bags. Okay, good. We learned, we gained valuable experience, even if we didn't come out ahead in this show. This is not the show we want to vend at. People were there to buy hand dyed yarn. So we should have been able to sell our hand dyed yarn.
I
Right.
am also much less worried about any kind of financial concerns. More am I worried about the lack of respect for vendors and the frankly dangerous conditions that our customers and our colleagues and ourselves were placed in an unsafe event. And that
There's
is why we chose to speak out after our experience because it was unacceptable to me that people felt unsafe in a place that we had asked them to come.
there's been no other event we've gone to where I felt unsafe.
No, absolutely not.
Right. Well, the organizers issued an apology. What did you think about that apology when you read it?
I found it to be inadequate because it didn't address the concerns that I felt like I was hearing and that I had, specifically accessibility, communication, and
Fire safety?
yeah. And when I say accessibility, I mean accessibility for people who use mobility aids. I mean accessibility for people who are not confident walking on unstable surfaces. And I also mean ability to move around in a space for any person, including able bodied people who were not able to move around in the way that made them comfortable.
We had a friend tell us that when she was inside the venue, she spent 10 minutes looking for an exit and calmly trying to move towards it. And in those 10 minutes, she was unable to succeed.
And I also feel like, in terms of the apology that was issued, I was disappointed in the lack of accountability because I know how much effort goes into most of the events we do. And I know how much of that is due to the advocacy of the organizers. And in this case, it was clear from the minute we started that that advocacy was not present in this case. And I do think that that is a mistake on behalf of Wool and Folk. And I didn't feel like that was reflected in the apology.
I feel like a lot of apologies come with an actionable plan. An apology that I believe comes with it. Here's how my behavior is going to change to reflect the apology I'm giving. And that's, something you learn from a young age. I'm sorry for hitting you. In the future, I won't hit you. right? Like that's the thing you talk to a child about. And not seeing the same kind of actionable plan through an apology. And no, it's not as black and white as what is expected moving forward. But there is a we will make sure that the aisles between booths are at least 60 inches so that it is accessible to be have mobility aids go through. We will have a fire egress plan in case of an emergency. We will have the promised security on staff so when you leave all of your product outside, we know it won't get stolen.
Well, you mentioned on your Instagram, you put a statement there that from now on, you will try to sort of interview vendors when you agree to certain events and that you're going to be asking them these questions. Do you feel like it's your responsibility to make sure that the venue you provide services in are accessible for all?
I think it doesn't become our responsibility to make it accessible. It is our responsibility to choose the accessible spots. Whereas I'm not going to walk into a store and be like, before I work with you, you must change X, Y, and Z. But when we are approached to work in a place or when we apply to vend somewhere before we sign a contract, I'm going to ask for proof that this stuff has been considered.
Right.
And we've already reached out to one of the events we'll be doing this month or this upcoming month and saying, hello, I know we signed a contract already. Due to things we have experienced, we have these questions for you. And within minutes, we got an email back saying we're bringing it up with our board. We will have the email ready for you in the next few days. So anybody who's planning an event, who wants an event to be successful and safe, should already be considering this and should already have those answers ready.
These should be easy questions. We're talking questions like, how many exit doors are there? Are there steps up to the event space? What kind of flooring is there? Do you have an emergency exit plan?
Do you have accessible bathroom stalls? How many and where are they located?
Those are questions that anyone who's planning an event should be able to list off, should have already considered and planned for. They are bare minimum questions.
We could make a better list that's more inclusive. That may take longer for some people to answer, but this question, this initial screening is essentially what it is.
We don't want to place any burden that the organizers wouldn't already have on them.
If they're not considering these things, that says more about them as a venue and organizers than it does about anything else.
We just need to make sure that our customers and our friends are able to be confident in the events that we go to. And it's unfortunate that that is now something that we personally can't take for granted, but it is something that's important enough to us that we're going to take steps for.
What are the chances of you vending at Wool and Folk next year?
Absolutely.
We will not be doing that.
Well, I'm going to put the information about you guys in the description of this video so my viewers can look up your sites and support you by buying or sharing your information with their friends, spreading the word about you. And I hope that's going to help you to recoup some of the losses you had this time of the year.
Thank you
so much.
And thank you so much for giving us this time and doing all of the work to compile these interviews. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Hi, so I have Meg here from Meg's and Company. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, tell me a little bit about how you started dyeing, like what's your philosophy about dyeing? Tell me a little bit about your company.
So I started dyeing about 2015. I had kind of a slow start in that the original intention of what I wanted to do is very different than what I do now, but I think that's normal with, you know, most makers. So I actually started off as a crocheter that I wanted to sell my ready-made items at different craft fairs and whatnot. So I started just making my own items. It was a lot of shawls. I still love shawls. a lot of boho style, lots of fringe. I used to weave like silk weavings into them. Just really enjoyed that. And, you know, as we all know, as we get more and more into this, the materials can be very expensive. We all know how expensive a skein of yarn is. So as I, you know, was having, you know, good sales and whatnot, you know, it's hard to ask somebody to purchase, you know, a scarf for $300, but that's what it cost me to make some of these items. So as a way to try to essentially lower my price point, that's where I started looking into, well, can I just source my own materials so that I can start getting things, you know, more at a wholesale rate. And so I started off with just trying to work with some yarn companies to see if I could purchase wholesale. And at least back in 2015, if you were not a yarn store, most emails was never even, I never even got a response. So that's why I was like, okay, well, I can do this then. I'm in science. I have a chemistry and a microbiology background. So I kind of delved into the actual science of like how it works, how you bind molecules to protein. So I just went at it from a really scientific direction, started sourcing my own materials, started dyeing, and just really, really enjoyed it. It is fun to throw color on a canvas. And that's essentially what I was doing. So more and more, I just started amassing more yarn that I could even use. And I was noticing that I'm actually having more enjoyment dyeing the yarn than making people's stuff. So my Etsy store, I started off on Etsy. You know, I used to have jewelry and scarves and all my stuff. So I just started throwing yarn up there, and that's what was selling. Not my scarves, not my shawls. So in 2017 is when I did like a full pivot and said, okay, I'm going to change directions. I wrote up a formal business plan, really got into sourcing materials, you know, contacting different mills, choosing how I wanted to do this, and essentially rebranded as a hand-dyed yarn company. And I was still pretty small, you know. I think in my first year I sold 20 skeins of yarn, but that was fine because I really just wanted to do it for the passion. 2018 and 19 is when I wanted to really give this a go. And that's when I started doing fiber festivals and craft shows.
Right.
And I feel like it's just been up from there.
Well, you also differentiate yourself because you go for sustainability, you go for ethically sourced yarn, so you pride yourself on that. How was that journey going for you?
Yeah, that's definitely been a newer direction for me probably in the past 2 years or so. And a lot of it is just as I've gotten really, really immersed into the fiber world and into the fiber community, and just especially learning a lot more about the global wool production, the wool trade, where it comes from, the different countries, you know, the different regulations that they have concerning pollutants, and, you know, just really thinking about the carbon footprint of yarn traveling from, you know, Australia to be mills in Italy, to be stored in the UK, to be shipped here, and just the journey that it goes on. And like, I can get it here, you know, and really shrink that carbon footprint and actually support some local wool producers. So I've had a couple, you know, opportunities to purchase yarn batches from, you know, different shearing events, and that it's just been amazing to more work directly with the source, and to get some really special yarn. And that's kind of, you know, I start working with these skeins, and it really is just special. It's different. Nobody else can have it, kind of a thing.
And you now concentrate on like breed specific also yarns, right, for your store?
Yeah, I'm trying, you know, so again, trying to, you know, keep price points low. So I'm trying to find US source merino wool, to again, kind of, you know, decrease my carbon footprint by at least sourcing from the country that I live in. And then it is a higher price point because it is a lot more expensive, you know, going into those more breed specifics. So working with New York State wool producers, I have a custom yarn in my shop that was, it was spun at Bat and Kill, and I'm working on another spin that hopefully is going to come out late spring, early summer. And it's been interesting too, because you really start learning about how much it costs to produce wool, and especially in New York State, the land value in New York State is expensive.
Right.
So yeah, trying to find that balance of, making sure that everyone is getting fair pay, but the yarn is still accessible.
Right. Well, I saw one of your reels on Instagram from like last year, I think, a couple years ago, where you were showing how you set up a booth and how much planning goes into that. And you were playing on paper with like the size of the booth, the size of the tables, the size of your like standing racks, and how it's gonna fit and how that doesn't fit and this doesn't fit. And that like process takes a while. Is that still the same way? Like, do you still set up the table the same way?
Yes and no. I feel like every single show that I do, I come back with lessons learned, and I don't think I have found that perfect booth plan yet. I'm still seeking that out. But yeah, it is a lot of work, because there's you only have a 10 by 10 space, and you want to show as much product as you can.
Right.
But then you also have to think about signage. How do people know what it is, what price it is? And then also think about the user experience in the booth. Do they have enough space to look at the product and pull stuff and compare it and look at it without getting elbowed? Is there movement and flow in the booth? So when you're done shopping, how easily can you get to cash out? Are the people in the cash out line in the way of the people shopping? So it's a lot of, it really is a lot of planning. And especially too, as I change products, the display has to change. And, when I do new shows too, I don't want it to look the same. So it is a lot. So, I live in a smaller house, so I can't necessarily set up my whole thing to just see how it is. So yeah, I created those little paper pieces. They're actually to scale. So that's how we can move it around and get a sense. I even have kind of scaled people. So to get a sense of like, how much space do people have in the booth to breathe and shop. And then I usually set up kind of like one wall at a time. So I do have like a grid walls in my yarn shop. So I set that up, stage how I want all my colors to look, write it out and photograph it, and then pack it all up.
Well, let's talk about this year's show. So Rhinebeck, or like as other people know, New York Ship and Wool Festival takes place every year in Rhinebeck, New York. And there are it's very difficult to become vendor there. A lot of people go there for like years and years, decades, basically vending there. So there's a lot of festivals, sort of like a pre-game taking place on Thursday and Friday. So you this year participated in Wool and Folk. Was that your first time at Wool and Folk?
No, I was a returning vendor. I did it last year.
And did you have a good experience last year?
I did. I really did. It was, every festival has its pain points, and I think it's also human nature that you're going to kind of look, well, I wouldn't have done it that way, kind of a thing. So yes, there was a list of things that could have been better. Was it crowded? Of course it was, but to some degree you want it to be crowded. Right. That kind of feeds into that, that atmosphere of excitement and whatnot. But yeah, I did it last year, and I thought it was a great event. It seemed like, people were genuinely having fun, hanging out. Even though it was very crowded, there was still space to talk and hang out and go listen to the music, listen to the podcasters, go get some food. I know the food lines are long, but I also haven't been to a good festival where food lines are not long.
Right. Right. So how long in advance do you prepare for an event like that?
So yeah, I'm trying to think of when I formally got accepted in May, and I've been pretty much right away is when I started planning, started mapping out what products I'm going to bring, placing orders to make sure that I have enough stock. And then I was dying for this all summer. So fortunately, you know, summers are always a little bit slower in the fiber industry. So I had a lot of time to do that. So I think if it was something where I had to dye over like the holidays, I would have needed way more time. But even with that, yeah, it was still about 3 full months dedicated to preparing inventory and coming up with my marketing plan. Essentially, you have to start commissioning samples. You know, people need 4 to 6 months to knit samples. So yeah, that started, even some of the samples I was hoping I'd get in again as a returning vendor. So even some of those samples were in my head going back to February, and we're, you know, already distributing yarn to sample makers.
Right. How was the communication this year in comparison to last year with the organizers?
You know, up front, it seemed okay. So I think a lot of it was, you know, I at least got the sense that I didn't think that there was a lack of communication until you realized how much was not being communicated, if that made sense. You know, so we got our initial email, I actually really liked how they send out what they call a vendor handbook. And it was like a Google Doc that it just had it all in there, and it's all in one place. And I actually really appreciate that, because sometimes when you get like 6 emails where it's each a little tidbit, you're like, you're making your own Google Doc of trying to keep it all straight and organized. So initially I thought that that part, at least for me, it was working, and I appreciated that organization. I think where things started to get a little chaotic was definitely the venue change.
Did that take place?
So I found out about it on a Zoom call with the event organizers. So it was I think it was about 5 weeks before showtime. And it's normal to have a vendor call where, you know, you have the opportunity to ask your questions. They're going to kind of fast go through everything that's happening, you know, talk about, you know, special plans and whatnot, you know, here's how we can load in and all that stuff. So yeah, it was normal to get a Zoom link about a month in advance to, you know, let's all get on the same page. So yeah, so there was announced that we're changing venues, and yeah, you kind of just saw everyone's face like, don't panic, don't panic. But you know, it was diffused very quickly, because it was this whole list of like, this is why we're doing it, and we're doing it because it's going to make the show so much better. So, you know, New York State has had a very, very wet summer. So even if it wasn't raining, every field right now is just a mud pit. It's just been a very wet summer. So, you know, kind of going into the orchard is probably just not the best place, because it's going to be muddy, even if it's not raining. So now we could be inside. And the event itself, for me at least, definitely seemed a lot more on brand for that kind of upscale festival that this kind of festival seemed to be marketing towards, where, you know, because the last venue was also a wedding venue.
Right.
And so it just was nice. It was a little bougie instead of being, you know, in a field.
Right.
So I really liked that. And I was actually really excited about it. I was relieved to be inside, or I thought I was going to be inside.
So like when usually you plan for the event, when you pack for the event, you know ahead of time if you're going to be indoors or outdoors, and you prepare differently for the events.
Right. And it's so usually, yeah, you would definitely know that you're indoors or outdoors. Usually that's right in the contract. Like you are, you know exactly, you know, the size of the booth, what the amenities are going to be. You know, sometimes you get electricity, sometimes you got to pay extra for it. Sometimes you get Wi-Fi, sometimes you don't, sometimes you got to pay extra for it. So usually that's all handled just in the contract, that here's what you're getting and here's what it costs. And then it's normal for anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks. Sometimes it gets to 1 week before is where you get your layout. And the layout is important because there's a big difference between having a booth where you have 2 neighbors and a corner booth. Because again, thinking about that traffic flow, you know, if I've got a walkway here and a walkway here, I don't want to put up a wall that then, you know, blocks the flow in and out of my booth.
Right.
You know, so yeah, so I had 2 plans ready to go. I had a corner plan and a what I call a stall, just traditional three-walled stall ready to go. Had not heard anything about where we were. But I was like, it's fine. I've got 2 plans. And so, you know, we're gonna just see what the booth is like and who the neighbors are and we'll decide when we get there which layout to set up. And I was prepped for both a corner or a row.
So what happened when you arrived?
So yeah, when I arrived, so there was a mood. So there was definitely a mood, a chaotic mood. So I got there Thursday, about 10:30. So, you know, I'm not a super early morning person. So I was like, 10:30 is good because I can rest. We should be able to get the booth set up in about 3 to 4 hours. That's how long it normally takes me to set up. And then I can go back to my rental, rest for like 45 minutes, put some makeup on, and then do the pre-show. So about 10:30. So I get in. The first warning sign was that a vendor was openly, literally sobbing. And I was like, whoa, that's weird. So I was like, okay, she's dealing with her thing, you know, let's keep going. And then, you know, I saw some friends that, you know, that I know online or I vended with before, and they were setting up outside. And I was like, oh, you guys are outside. That's cool that there's this tent outside. And they're like, yeah, we're outside. And I was like, uh-oh. Like, okay. So I go into the building trying to find somebody to check in. And it was just mass chaos in that building. Vendors, it was just basically like every vendor was struggling. You know, some didn't have electricity, there was one vendor that was put in a corner. She was told to set up in a corner where the other 2 booths were like this. So she's like, how am I supposed to?
Right.
So there was a lot of that. And I'm like, it's fine. Don't panic. Setup is always hard when you're doing physical work. You're tired. Emotions are running high. It's fine. Okay, so I got checked in and it was basically like, okay, you're outside. She said there's a row of 10 by 10 pop-up tents. She goes, just pick whichever one you want.
Also, it wasn't mapped.
No, it was not mapped. So I was like, okay, that's different.
Has that ever happened at any other festival that you attended, that you were just moved from inside to outside without notice and without a map?
No, I have never moved from inside to outside. I have done one other show where there was definitely some interesting moving, but it was nothing like that. Like I've showed up to a show where, you know, you think you're going to get like a square booth and it was more like you got a wall, but that was handled with so much like apologies and grace. And it was just like, basically it was like, you know, please help me make this work kind of a thing. Not like, go find one.
Okay. So you went to that row of tents.
Yeah. So I went to the row of tents. I was the first one there. So I got to pick which one I wanted. So yeah, just trying to figure out. So they were all kind of mixed. There was a couple that were on all grass. And then there was a couple that they were actually like half on the sidewalk. So they were all blocking half the sidewalk. And then there was like these gravels, probably for like water drainage, was on the other side of the sidewalk, and then grass. So I opted one of those only so that it was more in the middle. it was kind of right in front of the doors where the book house was. So I was like, oh, this is great for traffic flow. People are going to come out or go in and they'll literally have to walk right by. So I was like, okay, I picked this spot. So we started setting up, you know, and there's just a lot of little frustrations, you know, and again, the things that it's like, this is part of vending, and I'll own those little frustrations. You know, you vent about it over wine at the end of the night, but like, that's that, you know, so it was sloped.
Right.
That's frustrating. And again, because I didn't know I was going to be outside on a slope. Usually I have weights so that depending on how the grid ball is going to slope, I can weight it so that it's not going to fall on somebody. I did the very, very first year, I did an outside event in very strong winds and the grid ball fell. So, you know, you learn you need weights for your grid balls when you are outside because they can fall and it can hurt somebody. You know, they've got the peg spikes. That's dangerous. So I was a little worried about that because I didn't have weights or anything. So we ended up lashing everything kind of to the tent. So then that way it wouldn't fall backwards or forwards. So that was working. So we got everything set up. I never had power and I kept asking for power and it's like, oh, it's coming, it's coming. So by this point, setup took a long time. You know, there was difficulties with.
Explain me what you need power for.
So some of it is just, so I brought lights. So I had lights to illuminate the product. I knew it was going to be raining. So even though you're outside, you're in a tent and it's going to be gray sky. So I had brought a lot of lighting. I had a big neon sign. That was my new booth addition for the year. I was all like, I'm getting a neon sign. They're fun. So I had that. And then most importantly is for your POS system. So to power I have like a square checkout. So, you know, your iPad plugs into it and it has the credit card thing. So to be able to take payments, you need power for. I have kind of an old iPad. I think it literally lasts about 45 minutes without a charge at this point.
Right.
So that's definitely the most important for me in my booth. So yeah, so by this point, it's now about 3:30, because there was definitely some maneuvering. This is the one show I will bring a trailer for because we're traveling, and so I want my car to be empty so I can use it as a car. So we bring a trailer. So there was a lot of pivoting we had to do. And again, you know, whatever. We did it. It was frustrating, but we made it work. So it took a long time to set up. So like I said, normally I can set up my booth. You know, we know what we're doing. My husband, he sets up all the furniture. I literally draw out, here's where I want this. He knows ahead of time. He just does it. And I usually pack everything up in the reverse of how I want it up. So it packs out quick. So I'm like, I've got this down. It literally should take 3 to 4 hours tops. So it's now 3:30. So I was not able to go home. I was not able to eat, not able to shower or any of the things. I'm like, okay, that's fine. So the people had paid to come to the preview party were starting to show up. So we're like, okay, you know, so I actually did have a battery. I've been to shows where I have been promised electricity and that has not happened. So I was prepared to not have to depend on the venue because that happens when you vend.
Right.
So I try to make sure that I have as many things that I can control as possible. So like I have a hotspot. So if there's no Wi-Fi, we got it. I have 2 like big portable camping batteries. So if there's no power, that's fine. I got it. So we made it work. You know, it was fine for the preview. So then it came to packing up for the night. So again, trying to secure the tent for weather. So we all saw the forecast. It was supposed to start raining overnight and into the morning and pretty much all day on Friday. And it was going to rain a lot. you can see like how many inches are forecasted. And when it starts getting up to that, half inch, you're like, that's rain.
Right.
So it was just one of those 10 by 10 pop-ups that you can order on Amazon. So I was given part of a wall that covered about half of the back wall. And I was given a wall for the front. And I think the idea was that, because all the tents were so close together, you don't need the side walls. But that's not how rain works and how water works. It's going to find, those ways it can go in and go in. So I was freaked out about it. And so I made the decision again, I'm going to take things into my own hands. I'm not going to wait for someone to put up sidewalls. I just packed everything up. Because I'm like, I'm not going to ruin my inventory for the rain before this event has even started. So I packed everything up. So yeah, so it's just a very long day of, basically constantly doing packing, unpacking. And so I finally left at 9. Thankfully, like some friends had like gotten me some food from the dinner. So go home. So yeah, so I show up Friday morning, and we had gotten there very, very early because now, I was hoping to, stroll in at 11, booths ready to go, let's party. But I knew I now had to reset up my entire booth. So we got there really, really early. It was about 8 or 9 o'clock. And it was downpouring. It was raining. So I get to the tent, and where I had no sidewalls, the rain is just literally, it's like just coming in and using that momentum from the canvas to literally pour into the tent. And because I had essentially lashed the grid walls to the tent, the actual grid walls weren't really covered by the top of the canopy. So the water is just pouring down those grid walls. And so it's like, okay, now what? So I went and found somebody. I went to security, I went to the venue staff. At this point, I can't find any organizers, and just said, do you have sidewalls? Do you have tarps? Anything? And they were like, no, we don't. So I was like, okay. So I finally find one of the organizers, and essentially their solution was to take all the grid walls off from the tent and bring everything in so it's firmly inside the tent. And I was explaining, okay, but that's not a 10 by 10 space. If I bring everything in a foot or two, yes, it's dry, but now I'm in an 8 by 8, which is going to be really tight for crowd. Like I can fit in it, my stuff can fit in it.
Right.
But you can't get people in an 8 by 8 space. That's too tight. And then I was also nervous not having weights. If you remove them from the structure of the tent, those grid walls are just going to topple right over. So I was like, yeah, that's not going to work for me. It's just not. So I had all my stuff packed. Everything was in totes, piled up in the very center of the tent to keep everything dry. And I was so tired. So I kind of bitterly was like, I gotta go. Like I'm not, it sucks. I'm going to be out the booth fee and the investment in inventory that I've made, but I can go home and I can put my inventory online and sell it instead of it's ruined, So I think I got lucky because I was like one of the first people there. So she was just like, okay, let's find a spot for you inside. So I did get moved inside. She moved another vendor's tables and stuff that they had set up the day before. She essentially just moved them, just shoved everything into a corner and put a table and said, you're gonna have to make do with this.
So instead of 10 by 10 booth, you just got a table to put your stuff in.
Right. Yeah. So I had a table, and at that point, I really believe that my options were have a table, meet people, make connections, try to still sell some yarn or go home.
Right.
So I was like, this we're gonna make do. We're gonna make it work.
Well, did it work? Because like then I was trying to get into one of the buildings and I just could not, and I was looking for specific booth. I was there to be like a guest of one vendor. So I was trying to locate them. I didn't have the map. They told me they were in that building. It took me 40 minutes to get in and out of the building and try to find them, and they weren't there. So was that like a good decision for you to move to inside? Like, did you make sales? Was it the right decision looking back?
Looking back, I think yes. Because again, for me, at least in that space that I was in, I think my other, I could have still, maybe just had one table in the very center of that outdoor booth. So I feel like it's the only way that I could see to sell was to condense the size of my booth. So I could condense it outside and still risk getting wet. Or at least I've got, no mud on the ground and a roof over my head. So I do think that that was the right move for me.
Right.
And it was definitely very, very, very crowded. Where I was kind of, actually where I was is where the two women that came from the Scottish Yarn Festival, they had their table set up in that spot for the preview event. And they requested to move because they said it ended up being in the way of the walkway. So it was like basically in front of a very narrow hallway where you had to go through to access where the bar was. I think Les Garçons was over there. So it was a very narrow walkway. So they were having an issue with 200 people that it was blocking the way. But again, I was like, it's this or go home. So
right.
I was like, we're going to make it work. So yeah, it was very, very packed. So I know a lot of vendors said that they never got a vendor packet. And it seems like a minor thing, like, oh, who cares, you didn't, get a packet. But why that packet is important for especially very crowded events where, at local shows, people, tend to recognize me or know who I am because I've been at the same local shows for 4 or 5 years now. So, but in these shows, nobody knows who I am. I'm a tiny little person, nobody knows who I am. So without that lanyard, that says I belong here,
Right.
I was physically pushed, moved, elbowed, like nobody knew that I was a vendor and that I was supposed to be standing there. Everyone was like, please move, excuse me. So like that was hard, that so you're just kind of standing like here at your table, like here's my stuff, and like people are physically moving you out of their way. So yeah, it came with struggles. It was hard.
Let me ask you this thing. Like, do you think that the only reason that was a problem with this festival is because it was raining? Because there is a lot of people out on internet, on Instagram, who go like, you should have just toughened it out, and like things happen, you can't expect, it's like weather happens, you can't control it. Like, do you think that was the issue?
No. I think part of the proof is there were 2 other events that were going on that day that were also outside in the rain, and they didn't have those same issues. Do I think the rain was a huge factor? Absolutely. Of course it's going to rain and it's going to be muddy outside. That's what happens when it rains. Grass is going to get slippery. It's going to get gross. Even sidewalks can get slippery. I feel like the festival, if this is like the hill, I think it was kind of at the very, very top of the hill, and the rain is just what kicked it right over. Like, could it have been a little bit better without the rain? Probably. Of course it would have been. I mean, yes. But being there on Thursday and how crowded all the vendors were just trying to set up, and there wasn't a single person there, and everyone is just so packed and there was no room to move to set up. Initially when I was outside, like my husband was there and I was like, oh my God, thank God I'm outside, because that building, you can't breathe in that building.
Right.
And there was no people there yet.
That was just vendors, right?
Right.
Well,
And then, so it was too crowded before a single person showed up.
Right. So the organizers issued an apology. What was your feeling about that? And or like, what did you expect to happen after the show was done?
I think if there was any sincerity, or I guess any accountability for, I made decisions. And speaking like if I was the organizer, I made decisions and I had to make decisions on behalf of hundreds of vendors and thousands of people. And I made those decisions with the resources I had, but they ended up, hurting people, not being right. I was expecting at least something private in an email, of like, let's take time and decompress, or, like just some sort of acknowledgement, even if it wasn't public. And what I was hearing from other vendors and stuff that had actually reached out via email on Friday and Saturday and Sunday, that they just got vitriol back. And then now she's just not responded to anybody. So I think hearing that it's just been blame, and it's, you got to take some ownership.
Right. Do you think you're coming back next year? Do you think you'll try to vend there again?
No. I think that decision is even out of my hands. So my sanity was held together by my husband and my booth buddy, studio assistant Amanda. There was a moment that I was just standing there staring. I couldn't make a decision. It came to like, do we move inside or do we leave? And I was just standing there, and and that's when they, a little less stakes for them. So like, let's just go inside. Let's just, so they're just keeping everything together at the end of the event. Because I'm forgiving and very optimistic. And at the end of that event, we're driving home pretty much in silence. And it was just, so you ever want to do this again? It's not gonna be with us. So I say like, it's not even my choice anymore, that it's, yeah.
Did you have positive experience with other vendors? Was there just the sense of camaraderie, like coming together, helping each other?
Absolutely. And I honestly believe that that's why this show happened. And the only reason the show happened, the vendors coming together, I mean, and it was instant. It was, the one vendor who was assigned a space they couldn't get to, their neighbor was like, I'm going to rearrange my booth design that I spent weeks planning and hauling and have already set up. I'm moving so you can have a space. Like there was little stuff like that. And that's not little, like that's, you spend hours of your time planning. And, for me, I stopped dyeing yarn about 2 weeks in advance so I can see it and do all the things. Vendors sharing power cords, power strips, vendors allowing, especially the one tent that was on the gravel and it was sloping. There were vendors that were letting other vendors lash their grid walls to their structures that were a little bit more secure. There was another vendor that went out and purchased tarps for everybody that was in their tent. And didn't even ask for money for that. And it's, it's something that security and weather protection should come with your booth fee when it's, in your vendor contract that you're going to be provided a tent. Not every venue provides tents, but,
right.
but in this case, they said that in the contract that they would be providing the tents. So that was huge. My neighbors outside, always checking, helping, the same thing. We were trying to position our stuff so that both of our areas were as dry as possible. When I finally did move inside, everybody was literally picking up a tote, carrying it, everybody helped move. Everyone was helping to set up. People were sending their own staff, because now I had an hour before showtime to try to organize things, organize the bins so that I could get to the product should somebody want something. So I ended up doing basically putting one of each skein on the table. And then it was if you want additional, we'll dig through the totes and get it. So helping to organize that so we could access it, setting things up, moving their stuff so I would have more room. Yeah, it was just a no questions asked, what do you need?
Well, because you were vending there last year, you have comparative figures of how you did this year in comparison to last year. How did you do?
Ultimately, I think I was one of the luckier ones. I did okay. So, just the amount of investment that goes into the show, I did still come out a little bit under. But I did okay. I'm fine. And I will say that the response online has just been so amazing. So I will say that with online sales that have come out since, I have now met my goal, and so I'm not at a loss anymore, which has just been, yeah, you just have those moments where you're like, this is not just a hobby. It's not just a craft. We really are a community that, that cares.
Right. Well, I'm going to put all the information to your store and all your websites and Instagram and everything in the description of this video. So if you guys want to follow Meg or, check out her yarn, you can do that. And also just sharing her account with your friends and bringing more people to her Instagram and to her online store. That would be helpful, even if you don't buy a single skein. Thank you so much, Meg. I want to thank you for being my guest today and sharing your side of the story.
Thank you. Thank you for, allowing me to talk about it.
So my guest today is Lila from Terrapin Fiberworks. Hi, Lila. Welcome to my channel.
Hi, nice to meet you.
So have you done a lot of shows prior to Woolen Folk?
I've done about 6 or 7 shows before this. So this is my third season vending. We opened in August 2021, and I've been doing shows since spring of 2022. So.
Okay. What is different about your company? What do you concentrate on as far as what kind of fibers you dye in?
We do all plant yarns, so all cottons and linens and tencels. I focus on those because I kind of have a wool sensitivity, so I use plant fibers more. And there aren't as many people who dye plant fibers. So once I figured that out, I was like, oh, it'd be fun to teach myself how to do this and see what I can do. And it turned out to be a lot of fun. So it became a business pretty quickly.
Right. Have you been successful at other shows?
Yes, absolutely. I've had a really good time at all my previous shows.
Right. Well, tell me a little bit, what goes into preparation for the show? When did you start preparing for Woolen Folk?
Let me see. I signed on to it in May of this year. So that's when I started looking at my calendar for the rest of the year, when I would need to start buying yarn. I think the stock that I brought to the show I purchased in July and was working on preparing the colors throughout August, September, and October for this. This is stock that I prepare for all my fall shows together, but the volume that I was preparing was specifically because Woolen Folk was a very large show, and I'd been told there was a lot of attendance and very high profit for vendors who'd been there last year. So I wanted to make sure that I had about double what I would usually prepare for a show season for this.
Right. And how do you prepare for the booth setup? Like what goes into the booth setup? Like once you get what size of booth you're gonna have?
For me, I try to have like a relatively standard setup. Like I'm trying to set it up more or less the same way at each show. A 10 by 10 is a pretty standard space. So I have a set of grid wall and a table, a little bit of a basket situation, and a variety of samples. And I've got those organized in a certain way that when I'm imagining like a square 10 by 10 space, I have them arranged around so that you can enter the booth okay, you can get to me, you can get to the yarn. You know, all fingers crossed, you can also access it in some kind of mobility aid, like a chair or a cane. You know, that's always a work in progress, right? But that's the idea. I'm picturing a square space and the way that I've set it up at other shows in past to fill that space.
And was that successful like in the previous shows?
It has been, yeah. It's something because this is like, I guess, the 2022, my second full season vending. It's something that I've really been getting exactly how I want it, like my past 2 or 3 shows. So this was the setup I had planned for Wool and Folk was based on my like previous 2 shows this season. And it's been working for me.
How far are you coming from to Wool and Folk?
5-hour drive for us. We're in Maryland, so we came right up the East Coast.
So tell me about Thursday. Like, how was Thursday for you?
Well, chaotic. So we got there a little afternoon. We pulled into the lot between the book house and the waterfront building and like immediately parked in like 3 cars just to get off the street. I found one of the organizers straight away, like kind of by happenstance. She happened to be walking by as we were pulling in. And I said, you know, hey, I'm Terrapin Fiberworks, like, where's my booth? And I followed them back into the building and they sat down and had like this notebook, like handwritten notebook with the floor plan, and like half of it's like scratched out in Sharpie and relabeled. And she flips through and she finds me and my spot's scratched out. She's like, oh, you were supposed to be inside. Which is what they told me in writing the day before when I emailed to ask, because we didn't receive a floor plan ahead of time, which is what I've gotten for all my other shows. I actually have had the one for my next show like for 3 weeks already. So yeah, so they'd scratched it out, and they hadn't written me back in anywhere new, like at all. So they were saying, you know, like, okay, well, where are we going to put her? Like, there's some space like outside here. Like, well, we filled all those tents. So like, we have some extra tents. We could put up an extra tent. And I'm like, I'm supposed to be inside. Like, I'm packed to be inside. I don't have like tarps to cover my stuff. I don't have, you know, I've packed a lot of extra samples that I was going to display because it wasn't going to be exposed to the elements. Yeah, but at the same time, another vendor is coming up to them and has all these like very concrete reasons. They're also placed outside unexpectedly, and they really needed to be inside. And the organizers were just kind of like dismissing them and like, there isn't any more indoor space. So you're just gonna have to deal with it. Like, so I knew kind of like that was a lost cause. Like, obviously, I don't know, something had changed. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna give you 5 minutes. Went back to my husband. We kind of like moved the car sort of out of the way. And at that point, I got a hold of some friends of mine who said there was some space next to them. So I went and found their booth. The organizer like walked by again as I found this, and we said, hey, you know, I don't have a booth. This booth is open. Is there anyone supposed to be in this booth? Can I just take this booth? And they're like, yeah, fine. It's yours, done. So like my friends reorganized their booth so that it was like 2 booths. There's a pathway and their booth and an empty booth back here. And they had to change like how their tables were because you couldn't have gotten to that second booth from the pathway. Like, I'm not quite sure like what was supposed to be there. Like, this wouldn't have worked. And it was also in front of an exit door, but yeah, we rearranged and they helped me set up. I didn't have any lights. So like we were told we'd be indoors with electric and lights. And the show went till 7 on Friday and shopping was till 6 on Thursday. So that's like dark. Right. So my friends actually went to Walmart and bought lights for both of us because I was busy, like, you know, we wasted probably half an hour just trying to figure out like, wait, where on earth am I even going to be? And I was just like, and they were at Walmart and they're like, yeah, we're getting lights for both of us. And I'm like, lights. Oh my gosh. Like I forgot about the lights. I didn't buy lights. I didn't pack lights. Like they told us a month ago, I didn't need them. Yeah, they were just wonderful. They really, I would have had a much worse show.
Specifically, were you specifically told that it's going to be part of the show? Like, was that in your contract that the light's going to be provided, the electricity is going to be provided, that it's going to be indoors?
The lights and electricity, yes. The contract that we had was for the previous venue, the Orchard, which was an outdoor tent situation. So I guess technically we're all told originally we'd be outdoors. When we had the venue changed, there was a Zoom call that they talked about how great the new venue was going to be because everyone would be indoors unless they specifically requested to be outdoors. Repeatedly said this. So there was really no expectation that this was a possibility other than, that little sense when you don't get the floor plan and you're kind of getting worried and you want to double check, which is why I emailed them to check.
Were they responsive to the email?
They did respond. They responded in a couple of hours. They told me I was indoors. They told me that there was some movement of like specific booth spaces because they had just gotten the 5th floor space opened up and they were working to get everyone secure because of the forecast. So how I took that was more people will be indoors than how it is planned at the moment.
Right. So were you able to set up before the preview show started on Thursday?
Yes, just in time. Got it all together. I was done by about 3:30, which is when they asked us to be finished.
So what happened at that pre-show and what happened for the overnight? Did you have to pack everything?
Yeah, we made like a little mountain. The pre-show was very quiet. There weren't a ton of attendees. The weather was really nice. Honestly, I think most people really didn't make very many sales. I made a few. And then because we knew we had this forecast and we had these 2 pop-up tents that to cover the tent completely should have been 6 sidewalls and we had 3. We still didn't have the 4th one. We all like kind of, they went and got some tarps. I discovered some stuff in my bag that I used. We kind of piled everything in the middle and like put it all over with plastic and bungee. And my booth buddies found a 4th sidewall for like the beginning the next day so that we could protect it a little more and reset up the booth without the rain coming in the side of the merchandise. But I think they got that 4th sidewall from the venue staff. I don't remember. It was very frazzled.
Right. So what happened on Friday? How did Friday go for you?
Friday was very long. I got there probably about 11:15. There was water coming in the crack between our 2 because it's 2 separate pop-up tents, so there's water coming in the crack in the middle. And we were like, we can't put the booth back up the way we had it because this water is just going to be coming straight down onto the yarn the whole day. So we took some of my plastic tarps and some duct tape and my booth neighbors built this like gutter thing just so that the water would stop coming down and we could like move it to the side and out. And we were just having to like keep squishing the water out of this thing all day. It looked awful. But it was that or like everyone getting soaked trying to come into our booths and see the yarn. So it was crazy.
Have you ever had a show when the weather wasn't perfect?
Yes, I've had 2 in memory that were pretty bad with the weather. One of them actually, my booth got moved too. But they moved me to like it was kind of a VFD type of pavilion outdoor thing. So everything had like a roof, and I was in like they put me under a roof thing that had countertops. So like there was mist and wind coming in sideways, but it was a 1-day show, so I didn't have to leave anything out overnight with it like that. And actually my most recent show was locally and we had a tropical storm come through at the end of November. It was about 2.5 inches of rain and I was in an outdoor tent, my own tent, which has all the sides. It has all the proper weights. I built it up ahead of time. They told me I was going to be outdoors. I knew exactly where I was going to be the whole time. I could prepare for it. And I only paid like $95 for that spot. So it was what it was.
So you think like if you were told ahead of time that you might have been outside, you would have prepared differently for the show?
Yes. I would have packed a lot more weather protection stuff and just had that in mind for my booth setup as well, because I was kind of ad-libbing where some of the walls were just because of how the water was coming in.
Right. Do you think like if there was no rain, then the show would be fine? Like, do you think it just got unlucky with the weather?
No, I mean, the weather made it worse, but the crowding alone, like the first 2 hours, our booth was in this little nook that was like kind of I don't know, 20 feet away from the exit door for the building we were up against. And we had people coming like into our booth for the first couple of hours, not even to shop. They had just like finally managed to exit that building. And they were like really visibly frazzled. One person was like, I think I'm having a panic attack from the crowding. We had a spare chair that was sitting. And a couple of people were like, is it okay if we just sit in your chair for a few minutes? This is like the first chair I've seen. I really need to sit down. And we're like, of course. There were some other chairs, but like not 3,000 people's worth of chairs. It was just, I don't know. The crowding would have been an issue even with the rain, because all those people were still outdoors, even when it was raining. There just wasn't anywhere for them to go either way. So,
well, if you were one of the organizers, or even coming from the point of view of vendors, like how would you change that? What would you change about this event?
I don't think the venue made sense. I think it wasn't big enough. As soon as you showed up, you're like, they've done that creative photography thing you always do with a small space to make it look huge and spacious. And it's like, this is a beautiful venue, but it's like, it's not really 91 vendors and 3,000 people big. So I really don't know where anyone was supposed to go, because I don't think there was enough like floor plan for it. So I don't think the venue actually worked.
So the organizers issued an apology. What did you think about that apology?
I felt like it was kind of insufficient. We haven't had, that's the only communication I've had from them at all so far, was that apology. It felt hasty. It felt like it wasn't really speaking to what we went through, how much stress and some of the just interactions people had, some of the pressure people were under, all of the stuff that should have been done and wasn't. There wasn't a lot of like, I don't know. I didn't really feel seen by it, I guess, would be a good way of putting it.
Do you feel like the vendors all came together in this and made this event happen?
I mean, I certainly would have had a much worse show if it were not for my booth neighbors. I like pretty much credit them for making it out alive. Yeah, the vendor solidarity has been wonderful. I've made a lot of new friends. People have been really kind. The knitting community has been really kind. You know, it's not anyone's job to like buy stuff from us, but people are being really sweet and promoting our shops and helping us, because there's a lot to do right now. There's a lot of people are shipping their stuff back. People are trying to go through their damaged inventory. There's just a lot to do, and to have like people promoting us, so that's just one thing I don't have to think about right now, is talking about my shop online. Other people are doing that this week, and I can put my energy into stuff that's more important right now. And that's really lovely. And thank you to everyone who's taking the time to do that.
Right. Do you think you're coming back next year for the show?
No. No. Absolutely not. No.
So I have Eva here from Scottish Yarn Festival, and I was so lucky to actually meet Eva in person at Woolen Folk, and that was the best part of Woolen Folk for me personally. Welcome back to my channel, Eva.
Thank you for inviting me back, Irina. And I'm still trying to process the fact that I finally got to meet you in real life, because you've become a friend. And I think the longer you work in this industry, you know, you kind of gravitate towards certain people. And yeah, I can't believe that we were lucky enough that you came to kind of spend time with us.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about that event. So you are an event organizer in Scotland. You're not unfamiliar with what's going on in the preparation of the event, like how much work goes into putting something like this together. So when you came to Woolen Folk, you had certain expectations, like based on your life experience. So you invited me to be guest at your booth and just to hang out with you guys basically for an hour, and invite my followers, my viewers, to visit your booth. So my frustration up until the time I got there was that we were trying to figure out what time I'm going to be there, so I can announce to my viewers that I'll be at your booth from such time to such time, right? Or where that booth was. Or you also offered me a free ticket to come there, guest ticket. So I was like, okay, how do I get that ticket? So all those things, I was like sending you emails and saying, well, Eva, like, are you sure you're going to get me ticket, or should I buy the ticket? And where am I meeting you? And can you please let me know what time so I can plan my things around it? And you couldn't answer. Was that frustrating that you didn't get any communication from the organizers?
It's frustrating, but it's embarrassing too. And I am still trying to process all my emotions about everything. But overriding at the moment, it's embarrassment and shame, and it shouldn't be. Because, you know, as an event organizer myself, I mean, I've been organizing yarn festivals every year since 2016, multiples over a year now. That's my full-time job. How could I have been so fooled about the situation? And there's comfort, perverse comfort in a way that I'm not the only one, but it shouldn't have been how it is. So we had organised meetups with Amy Palco and Rebecca Clow, who were coming over from Scotland for the whole Rhinebeck weekend, and one with yourself and one with Kim Boynitz and the other boy. And I know from going to events myself and organising them that people want to meet certain, you know, the literati, I tend to call them, and they want to know where they're going to be at a certain point, because these spaces are usually so big, it can be really difficult to find someone. You know, if there's somebody in particular that you want to go and show, you know, look, I've made from your pattern, or I watch your podcast, or I follow your presence online, knowing that somebody's going to be there at a particular point, you know, really works for them and for us as well. You know, it's a two-way thing.
Right.
Because hopefully that means it's also bringing people to our booth that maybe didn't know us about us before, or want to come and learn more as well. So it's like, it's a two-way partnership. And I think, you know, the whole thing about this is that it should be a two-way partnership, or a multi-way partnership between organisers and other parties, and it wasn't.
Right. Like, what was your experience with this event prior to coming to Woolen Folk?
Really poor, but the difficult thing is that I've never vended at an international event before. So I have been to them, but I haven't vended. So I don't know what the norm is. What is the norm for those organisers? And that was part of the reason that not only did we want to go to that particular event, but we wanted to go to, you know, Rhinebeck, New York Sheep and Wool, and see how things are done differently. Not to copy, but just to see how things are stateside, to kind of look at our plans for the future. You know, we're businesswomen, and there were elements of holiday there, because if we're going, we want to fit in a few sort of touristy things. It's not an insignificant distance that we travelled, or an insignificant amount that we paid to do this. So we were looking holistically at, you know, the whole thing.
Right.
So there was very little information, and I'll be honest, right? So I applied after the cutoff date. I was looking to do an international festival. I had actually been offered a place at one in Australia, but looking at it, the time frame to get everything organised, and the differences in sort of like time differences, and the amount of time spent travelling, it was just going to be unfeasible. And, you know, the sensible person goes, yeah, that's not going to happen this year, much as I would love it to, let's not do that. And I looked for an alternative, and it's like, well, the alternative one, really the one that I want to go to, is Woolen Folk.
Right.
I had done my due diligence, so I had friends that had been the previous year, and including one of those friends is someone who's been working in the industry for 30 years. And if she goes and she tells you that it's a fantastic event, she loved it, she was hoping to go back this year and couldn't, and I'm so grateful that she wasn't, you know, she would have been flying out from the UK as well. You know, all the expense of all those things, but due diligence covers checking out people's own existing businesses' websites. It includes watching what all the podcasters have said about previous events. It's looking on the website. It's looking over all of the things before you make that decision. So I did that. I reached out, and very quickly I got an email, and on that email, and again, I'm ashamed to say, I opened it at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. I was still in my bed, had a cup of coffee, and I cried, proper ugly tears for half an hour because, you know, my business has already been through so much, getting it through lockdown, getting it through Brexit.
Right.
We hadn't even started the yarn brand at that point. I think we were on the cusp of it. But, you know, all those things. And then getting that, and it felt, right, okay, this was supposed to be a life-changing, a life-altering event for us, and it has been, but not for the reasons that it should have been, or not
Right.
wholly for the reasons it should have been.
And I feel like that's a very important point that you mentioned, because last year I went to Woolen Folk and I had absolutely amazing time. And because of that, like, I did a recap about Woolen Folk, I interviewed the organizers, and to me, like, it was one event, like if you had to vend outside of New York Ship and Wool, that was event I was recommending to all my friends, all the dyers that I met. I was like, have you considered about vending at Woolen Folk? So I sent so many people there that when you're saying you were embarrassed, like, that was the feeling I was getting. I was like, oh my God, what did I get them into? That was exactly how I felt. It was just pure embarrassment that, like, I was the one who facilitated them going through that hell.
Yeah, I watched your interview. I thought it was fantastic. I shared it with friends here. It's like, wow, look at this. And it also, that I was surprised at just how transparent she was in terms of figures as well, because I don't give out those details to my business because, quite frankly, it's not anyone's business how much things cost to put on. It's
Right.
significant cost. I mean, if you looked at the spreadsheets that I have to deal with and the legal paperwork I need to deal with in order to put on my events, your hair would curl. It's scary. It is scary. And for me, I make my income once a year off my festival in September, and the profit from that goes into the bank. I pay myself a monthly wage, which just every month goes directly off into my current account. I have to live off that.
Right.
I can't just dip into the funds of the business. And the other funds also have to then go into reinvesting in the business and what you're creating, all your deposits for the following year. Do your tutors need advance payments to bring them over from wherever they're traveling to? All those things. So that surprised me, but I thought in a way maybe that's just the way things are done. It's professional, but across the board there was so little information. And it seems that the preferred method of contact was, right, we're having a Zoom meeting, which isn't fantastic anyway. You've got over 100 vendors, and that's part of it. When we applied, we were told that there were going to be about 60 vendors.
Right.
Not over 100. We were told that footfall, or I was told that footfall was expected about 4,000. When it changed venue, it became 3,000. That's a significant drop in footfall, and you've just increased your vendor numbers. So that's reducing potential spend. I mean, that's the thing, that's something I say quite often to my vendors. It's like, I can make people shop at your booth. I can get them to the door, but that's also vendor responsibility to kind of advertise as well. We can get people to the door, we can get them to buy the tickets, but once they're in there, it's kind of up to you to draw the people. So there's so much emotional investment and creative investment into how you do that there as well. But like I say, the preferred method of contact was having a Zoom meeting, and then if you couldn't make that meeting, you would get sent a video link afterwards. So the real kicker to me was suddenly, right, we're having a Zoom meeting, and it was the one about the change of venue. It was scheduled for the time that my own festival was happening.
Right.
So there's absolutely no way that I can tune into that. And we were actually expecting them to turn up at our event to advertise what they were doing anyway. Can't watch it even when they were doing live, because I did join one of their meetings live. And the time difference, it was midnight and I'm on a meeting call, which is just what you do when you're working internationally. But I didn't have the time in the immediate aftermath of my own 2-day festival, because we're still striking down, we're doing press releases, I'm paying the invoices for everyone who needs paid. The remote vendors need all their stock boxed up and sent off. It never ends.
Right.
It never ends. And then you've got your thank yous to do and everything. So it generally takes about a week to properly tidy up all the odds and ends from an event, and then you get to breathe, and then you actually go, oh, I've just delivered something. Maybe I should watch some podcasts and see what actually happened, because you should be that busy
Well,
constantly
let me ask you about that, because like right now we are exactly a week after Woolen Folk. Has there been any communication between you and organizers?
No. No, and we didn't get an apology. What we got was a statement that was riddled with spelling and grammatical errors, which is not what I expect from somebody who used to be a doctor. So I don't like pulling people up for grammatical or alphabetical mistakes, because they happen for a variety of reasons. But when something that serious has gone down, you have it sense checked before you post anything. Now, I sent a WhatsApp message to one of the organisers. It's 7:39 on the morning, so like the second day of the event. So if you weren't there and you're not aware, the Thursday sort of late afternoon, evening, there was an advance shopping event that we were there, which was also a disaster, but it wasn't quite so bad as the main day. And at that point, I said, no, we have to move. I was going to wait until we could find the organisers, but of course I couldn't find the organisers as it was on the original setup. I didn't want to upset anyone. I didn't want anyone to turn around after I travelled all that distance and go, oh, well, you're just causing issues. Goodbye. Pack up your things and go. So I didn't send it that evening. And then I woke up in the morning and was stressed about it. And it's like, I don't know if we'll be able to find anyone when I'm there. I need to message them now. They've given us their cell phones details within an email that they did send out that didn't have a huge amount of information, but they're for emergencies. And okay, it's not like a life and death emergency, but we cannot be in the same space that we were in yesterday. We need moved. And I sent a WhatsApp message that was, you know, it's not particularly critical, and it's still sitting unread even after all this time. It hasn't even registered as read. Hello, really looking forward to today. Sadly, the space we're in did not work for us yesterday because our leaflets are on the bar, not on a table, and a clothing rail on the other side of a passage. Your attendees aren't realising that we are vendors. Is there an actual vendor spot downstairs somewhere that we can move to? It should only take us 5 to 10 minutes max to set up elsewhere. Thanks, Eva, the Scottish Yarn Festival.
So
Nothing.
like my feeling when I talked to the vendors, that it was a bit of a free-for-all, like go find yourself a spot, any spot, set up and just do your best kind of thing. Was that how you felt?
Yeah, we found out through an Instagram direct message the evening before from somebody, because you kind of start talking with certain vendors before you arrive. And one of them, I'd messaged them to actually ask, look, okay, you're set up. I didn't realise you were already set up. Do you have floor plan? You know, is there anything on that you can tell us where we should be when we go tomorrow? And was told, no, there is no floor plan. It is literally first come, first served. Get yourself here as quickly as you can tomorrow. Now, because of the change of venue, we already had a really good Airbnb in Stonebridge, which turns out was just 6 minutes away from the original venue.
Right.
We kept that. So we had a 44-minute drive to actually get to the new venue, but we decided that was probably for the best. That's what we'd do. So we had that drive. Sadly, because we had to get there earlier, it meant that I was unable to attend a trunk show at a local yarn store that I've been invited to go to, and I still need to follow up with the owners because I just feel horrendous about that. And we saw everyone who was there that day and absolutely gutted that we missed it. But the reason for our trip was to go to Woolen Folk.
Right.
It was to vend. So if we had to go there, we had to go there. And when we did get there, there was nobody, directors, there were no directors in high vis, there was nobody wearing lanyards, there was nothing to indicate who organisers were, who volunteers were, who staff were, apart from the staff of the venue itself had lanyards, and we're all wearing black. But they didn't seem particularly interested in talking to us. And to be honest, it's not really their place to be talking to us, and I think they were probably as confused as we were as to what was going on. It took me half an hour to actually find someone, one of the organisers, and that was only because I noticed and knew the person they were talking to at that point. And I turned to them and said, "Do you know where I could find so and so?" And I went, "That's me. I'm so and so." Okay.
Right. Well, so when you came on Thursday, did they tell you like go to this location?
No. No, there was no vendor check-in point. There was no, you couldn't visually tell who should be there. We weren't told which car parks to set in. We still had the information from the previous time where we actually had set up times to be given. Not only that, when we found that particular person, we were right outside a door of the building. So we were told everyone would be inside, and that was the reason for the venue change. Turns out it wasn't.
Right.
So we were split across two buildings, and some people were outside, and we were outside the second building. And at that point, kind of knowing what I kind of gathered from vendors who were sharing a little bit of information with me at that time, knowing that basically our stock were paper flyers, and that we weren't prepared for being outside because we'd come from Scotland, everything in our suitcases, and we brought the leaflets in with us as well. We really need to be inside. So we were standing outside the second door, and I kind of took the initiative and went, "This room will do. This building will do," because at that point I could see the big giant neon sign from Lamb and Kid and thought, right, everyone knows who Lamb and Kid are. That means that we can tell people where we are.
Right.
If we can get in there. Now, we were supposed to have what was originally a shared booth. I will disclose that it cost us $450 in vendor fees. So that's just a very small part of what it's cost us to be there. But that was the booth charge. For that, we should have had a table, a 6-foot table, and we should have had 2 chairs. We did get an email at one point saying, "Oh, suddenly we can't give you 6-foot tables because our supplier can't provide them. Everyone will be getting 8-foot tables now. If that's the problem, let us know within 48 hours." And I managed to get that email quickly, and I went, "Actually, yeah, that does cause us a problem because we have special fitted tablecloths that fit for 6-foot and they are our brand colours, so we'll need a 6-foot table, please." We didn't get a 6-foot table. If you go back and watch our reel, or we've got footage up on YouTube as well because we shared it there, what we were given was a little bit of space on a bar and a clothing rail on the other side of a passageway, not even 6 foot wide, what we were given. And we were told before we were even allowed to set up, when we arrived during set-up times, that they weren't ready for us anyway there, so to go away and come back at 2 o'clock. Go next door and have a coffee and come back. We've since discovered, and again, if you go and watch that video, because again, it just looks absolutely horrendous even being in that space, all those boxes that were behind us, which we thought were merchandise or something like that, it was actually vendor stock.
Wow.
For other vendors.
So what happened on Thursday night, like when the pre-show event was taking place?
It was a disaster. So we didn't get the vendor packs that we were promised. We are still waiting for our lanyards to even indicate, even just now, we're waiting for those lanyards to show that we're vendors. It's just a disaster, really. Where we were placed, like I said in that message, everybody assumed that we were staff at the venue because we didn't have a booth, because we didn't have a table. They didn't realise that we were a business paying, for the privilege of being there. The event for the advanced shopping actually opened at 4 o'clock. So the shopping was supposed to take place between 4 and 6. Nobody came into the building that we were in until 25 past 4. And even those people that arrived then were among the literati. They were there really just because they were there. There were people that they were wanting to meet up with. They had big bags full of whatever it was. They looked like swag bags to me. They weren't there to be shopping. We're lucky if we had as many as 12 people stop to talk to us
Right.
in those 2 hours.
Let's talk about Fridays. So there was a lot of comments on Instagram that, oh, you just too feely touchy, like it was a little rain, so everybody panicked and you should have been better prepared and things like that. You've dealt with, I mean, you're coming from a country where rain is a norm, right? You've
I
dealt.
was dancing, right? I was trying to make the best of the situation because Katie and I decided, right, we need just to go in with high energy despite what we've walked into, because we can control our emotions at this time. It's not fair to project those onto everyone else. And we were literally having a little bit of a boogie around the booth, singing to Travis's "Why Does It Always Rain on Me?" You know, because it was typical Scottish weather. You know, it's like this at this point, this is the icing on the cake, because we've been moved outside. We'd managed to get moved. We were outside. We did have tables, and that's something that actually I would like to kind of bring up at this point before I forget. The communication that we did have in advance tended to be more focused and pushing towards they wanted the vendors to attend the dinner part of the night before. Now, like I said before, we came a significant distance. My dinner ticket was going to be paid for, but that for Katie was not. Now, I have no qualms about paying for some, you know, someone who's come and help me or something like that. In fact, I have covered Katie's travel and accommodation and everything. She's coming to work for me, not expecting her to pay for it. But it was $160 for her to come in, which for the UK viewers watching, it's the equivalent of, because I wrote it down, $131.93. And dessert was like a cookie. How can you charge
Right.
those prices for something like that? And
That was the vendor's fee, because for the people who came there as visitors, it was, I believe, $250.
$250. Now, part of the reason why I kind of said, like, I did kind of say, like, that is a bit expensive, but primarily the reason that we're not going is you've changed the location, it's significantly further. We've already flown into the country, we're dealing with the changes with that. We've got a longer drive each way.
Right.
I have ME, so twice she was told I have ME. So it's not as if it's an unknown disability. We were never given chairs for our original booth. You know, how do you expect? And there was no seating about for anybody apart from that dinner. You know, you can't expect people to stand all the time. Anyway, even able-bodied. You can't, and there's so many hidden disabilities out there. You've got, it's basic stuff.
Right.
But sorry, we digress because we're talking about Friday. So what happened about Friday? We were outside. We'd managed to get moved. I managed to locate one of the organisers very quickly when I did arrive, even though I hadn't had a response. And all I got to say was, we need to move. And it's, how about here? And it was literally just pointing, and it's like, well, there's not any spaces to go. We'll take that. So we were outside. It was pouring with rain. The tables inside were already wet, because it's not just the rain, it's the moisture.
Right.
Sensation, how everything collects. So it doesn't matter whether you're going to be covered on all the sides, your stuff's still going to get damp inside. So tables were already damp. There were 2 chairs. The chairs were wet. There were puddles on the ground because they're on gravel and it's uneven and everything's tilted. I have the carry-on bag that I bought for luggage is ruined because it ended up just seeped with mud, and stock that we had inside that has been damaged. We had managed to get a clear trash bag to put a lot of the other tote bags and things that we had inside, so that at least they were covered in that and on the ground. So they weren't too bad, but no, we couldn't get into everything and we couldn't move or use anything that had been put in that. I found out afterwards that somebody had been moved from our booth and had been put inside somewhere, and they had actually put shower curtains up at the front of our booth. And that was incredibly helpful and protected us a little bit from the rain. I don't know what we would have done without those, and I don't know who that vendor was. because there was no floor plan. So I can't reach out and thank them. So if they are watching this, it really, really helped. Thank you for leaving those. I had thought to bring some basic things like cable ties and sellotape and things with me anyway, and they were already cable tied up, and we were able to kind of maneuver them slightly. And just, you know, you try and make the best of the situation. I brought this giant 5 foot by 3 foot soul tire with me, so I was able to put that on the outside of the booth so that if anybody could actually get into the venue and was walking around, at least you could see this giant Scottish flag and
Right.
realise something was going on there. But we didn't have the time when you've got to then go and change everything to kind of communicate effectively. Here we are. I did a quick live and it's like, see this big Scottish flag, you can't miss us. But people did, because we've heard since
Well,
that
I came to the venue looking specifically for you, and it took me 40 minutes of asking questions and going through, trying to get through the buildings where you were supposed to be, and asking every vendor, like, did anybody know where you were, to find you guys. Like, and I came with specific goal to find you, right? So I can't even imagine if for people, and I felt like when I was standing in your booth and I was like trying to talk to people, everybody was just like, the whole atmosphere was of this frazzled, where do I go, and what did I see, what I haven't seen, like where is anything, sort of confusion.
yeah, I mean, it is quite emotional, and you know, maybe we haven't put out the most eloquent response to what's going on, and we haven't detailed everything that went wrong, and that's partly because it's just so exhausting to emotionally constantly relive it, and we're dealing with the fallout from it, and there will be financial fallout from it. We had 20 kilograms of leaflets that we've had to ditch. I got Katie to film me putting them all into a trash bag. We had to find a way to dispose of those. They were branded specifically for that event. We had sponsors who had paid money to help us cover the cost of the flyers, and I, in good conscience, can't just hold on to that money. So I need to reach out to them and let them, I mean, you all know what's gone down now. And I'm lucky that I have such a good working relationship with them that none of them have come in demanding to know what's happened and about their money. But in good conscience, I can't hold on to that because that's not fair. Now, we did give out some flyers. I did have their samples there. I have spoken about them. But I don't feel that I've fulfilled my end of the contract. So how can I do that sort of thing? And it's embarrassing.
Well,
I
let me ask you, when you have your festivals happen, and you've had some like really tough ones,
Oh yeah.
when the queen passed away, like that was nerve-wracking, the whole thing, like, in so much uncertainty. And like, I've heard your stories, and I know that it's always something that you couldn't predict, and the weather and everything. Have you ever felt like this after the festival, like after your own festival, after like everything that can possibly go wrong happened? Like, have you ever felt like you felt after Woolen Folk?
If I'm being honest, there are times that I've run my own festival and gone, I can't do that again. I physically cannot do that again. And you very quickly get over it, because there are things that happen that you can't talk publicly about. It would be different if I was somebody, for example, like an indie dyer, and I've just got my own income to think about, and then I can go online and see whatever I want about whatever situation because it's just my income. I can't do that, you know, and again, I have to be incredibly careful about what I say and how I come across, because every single thing I say, every single interaction I have, whether that's online or in person, not only affects my business, it affects the businesses and incomes of every single person involved in every single one of my events. And
Right.
those people need that income to pay for their bills, to feed their family, to clothe them, to keep them warm. So I'm in a really difficult situation with that. I think the year with the Queen was the most difficult. So that every single year there will be umpteen things that will go wrong, and they will be the things that you couldn't have predicted, and you have to roll with it, and you have to be resilient, and you can't always have the solution that you want, but you come up with the best. And if you communicate it out, generally people understand and they rally. And to be honest, I think generally people don't even realise, your attendees don't even realise, and sometimes vendors don't realise something's gone on, and
Right.
sometimes they just don't know what's going on in the background, and the things that have happened. You
How
know,
was it different this time for you? Like how?
It wasn't my event. I wasn't in control. I'm not a control freak, but I mean, I think 2022 was probably the worst year for my festival, because not only did we have the Queen die, we had flooding outside, and the flooding was 2 centimeters from my back doorstep when I had to go and do setup. So I didn't know whether I was coming home to my own flooded home. And the day before setup, the lift, because the lift at our venue goes right down into the car park, that was under 10 foot of water. But in my head, I'm immediately going, right, oh my goodness, what do we do in terms of accessibility? What do we do for the load-in for the vendors who might need that lift? There are other ways to get in. We do have the accessible ramp up the front, but maybe not everyone can do that. But I have listed the majority of people who are coming with walking aids or in wheelchairs to begin with, because we have those companion tickets that are available, and we ask them to email us to let us know so we can get names on various lists, so that they don't have to pay for the ticket. And more often than not, people will tell me within the notes, I'm a wheelchair user. And I need to generally have that information in advance anyway, because it affects and informs my fire plans.
Right.
How many evac chairs do I have? How many members of trained staff do I have that can get to the evacuation points to get people down but I'm fire checked and I'm checked by the fire brigade, the police, the local council, everyone, before I get my license that I need to be able to hold these events anyway. And I don't know what the setup is within the US for that, but it's very different. So it is upsetting. It's extremely upsetting that, no accessibility appears to have been taken into account, because you can't move mobility aids or
Right.
wheelchairs over a gravel, and you shouldn't expect someone to bring a companion, because not everybody needs a companion, and there are so many hidden disabilities that you don't know, so you don't ever assume. There were nowhere near enough toilets, adequate toilet provision. We were told that there would be porta potties, and there would be bougie ones, and there would be vendor specific toilets as well. Didn't see a single one. In fact, I'm only aware of toilets in 2 locations that I saw.
Right.
Things like that. It's basic. It's the first things you do. And if you need to move your location, it's the first things you do. The venue should have its own fire plans. Things like
Well,
that. When I apply for my license, I have to submit the fire plans for my venue with the full-on risk assessments. All my vendors need to supply their own risk assessments for the event, which also then inform mine as well as an overarching one. And there's a risk assessment for the actual building, the staff, the management team there. So I don't understand, because there's got to be similarities between the two.
right.
There has to be, but I just don't get how it went so wrong.
The organizers issued an apology.
It wasn't an apology, it was a statement.
What would have they done that would change your mind about that event not being disastrous?
There's nothing that they can say. I did comment on the original post before comments were turned off, and I took a screenshot, because it's like, I know what this happens. I've been here long enough. We know this is the case. I took a screenshot, and full transparency here, I haven't opened my emails today, but considering the time difference, there won't have been an email yet. So we're over a weekend, and they haven't even had the courtesy to email their vendors. Never mind anyone else. You're assuming that everyone has access to Instagram,
Right.
to read that statement. I commented, I think within 38 seconds of it going live, because I was on Instagram anyway, nowhere near good enough. I'm still waiting for you, insert name of organizer here, to read the WhatsApp message I sent at 7:39 a.m. on Friday morning. I spent in the high single thousands to attend your event to promote ours. I've had to ditch 20 kilograms of leaflets because people left, couldn't find us, or couldn't get into our space, not to mention the debacle of the evening before.
Do you think
It's
you're ever going to
insane.
come back to Woolen Folk?
There will be no more Woolen Folk. There's no way that event can survive after that. It's not even just a case of vendor and consumer confidence and vendor confidence being knocked. It was so catastrophically bad and worse, dangerous. You know, I've seen photos of things that make me feel physically sick, that we were there. People I'd encouraged to come, Katie, who'd shut her own business to come and support mine. We were in an unsafe environment. I hate to think if there had been a fire or an accident, what the outcome would have been.
I know it's been a very long episode, but I hope you give it a listen, and I hope you will support these vendors. I'm going to put all their information in the description of this video, as well as the information about other vendors that were vending at Woolen Folk. Thank you for listening, and until next time, happy crafting.